You're listening to Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose, a new conversation space where educators and leaders explore what it truly means to lead with purpose, courage, and heart. Join Dr. Nathan Manley and myself, Jim Cummins, as we share the inspiration behind Lifted and how purpose-driven leadership can transform schools and communities. This is Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose.
Today, we're honored to welcome Dr. Mike Evans to the show. Dr. Evans brings more than 30 years of experience in education, having served as a classroom teacher, counselor, principal, and administrator. Over the years, he has supported schools across the country in implementing personalized, competency-based learning and high-reliability schools practices, helping leaders and educators move towards systems that better serve students. Jim and I have both had the privilege of knowing Mike for a long time and working alongside him through the years, and we are grateful for both his leadership and his steady commitment to helping schools improve in meaningful ways. Today, our conversation will center on Mike's new book, Assessment Literacy for Educators, co-authored with Robert Marzano and Julia Sims. The book challenges many of the outdated assumptions schools continue to hold about assessment and grading, and it offers a more accurate, equitable, and student-centered path forward. Through its framework and practical guidance, the book helps educators think more clearly about classroom assessment, grading, large-scale assessment, and competency-based learning. Dr. Evans, we're grateful to have you with us today. To get us started, would you introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your journey in education and what led you to this work?
Sure. Well, thank you guys first off for having me. It's really an honor to be here and visit with all of you again. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. Like you said, this is year 31 for me in education. I retired after 28 years in public education. I've spent the last 3 years doing this type of work as an associate and author for Marzano Resources. I'm blessed to get to travel around the country and work with different schools in different ways to support great outcomes for kids and improving our practice as professionals and as leaders as much as we can. And it's truly been a blessing, the opportunity to do that, to take the experience of those years and try to apply it in different places. So yeah, I'm just really fortunate. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, guys.
I'm gonna ask you to start with the book. What led you to write that this point in your career, and what your heart had to be in it to write a book. So what's the topic that really got you inspired?
Sure, sure. Sometimes I've learned that you're just in the right place at the right time. To go way back, just think about this from a career. Where did all this start? In many ways, since when I became a teacher in 1995, hence the gray beard, right? And that was about the same time that this idea of standards, learning outcomes and standards was really first being introduced. When I first started teaching, that either didn't exist or was a really new idea, and was fortunate as a young teacher that when the Missouri assessment program, our state tests first started being implemented, I was asked to go sit on teams and learn how to write assessment items for those tests and how do we align our tests and what do the standards look like and be involved in that work. And over the years, as a building counselor, a building principal, central office administration, served as district test coordinator multiple times in multiple districts. And that work of assessment, both from the classroom all the way through large scale assessment, has always been a part of my career along the way. And it was just one of those things that as I learned more, as I took on more responsibilities in that area and wanted to learn more, I really was able to start digging into the history, the background. How did Missouri get to the point with the map? Where did all that grow from through No Child Left Behind? I know I'm nerding out really bad right now. But all of that work comes along, and I get the opportunity to connect and work with Dr. Marzano and Mrs. Sims. And those connections, those opportunities led to being asked to contribute to this book, the Assessment Literacy for Educators book. It really is a culmination of Dr. Marzano's research into assessment over the last 30 years and all of the work he's done, getting deep into the structures of assessment How do we do that in classrooms? How do we do that in a way that's equitable, that's accurate, that really reflects student learning? So in a way, all of my experiences kind of built some of that background, but was just blessed by Dr. Marzano and Miss Sims to have the opportunity to help with this book and help support that work. And I think it's really timely, the environments that we work in now with schools, with accountability. It's still a major part of the work we do every day.
I know Nathan's gonna. This is Nathan's. I mean, I can just see him beaming right now. But I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna ask one more question as we kind of set the stage for listeners. Tell us a little bit about what HRS is and kind of the model and the framework, some of the things that you work underneath.
Sure, sure. I love high reliability schools and the structure that it provides. So high reliability schools, which is part this work embeds into all the work that we do, really embeds into, is a framework. And it's a framework that reflects what works in schools based on the research. So it grows out of the work of high reliability organizations, which are those organizations that are too important to fail. We think about things like air traffic control, the US military, very large corporations that cannot tolerate high levels of uncertainty. So the research of that, Dr. Marzano and Dr. Warwick worked together. Dr. Acosta has worked on that to develop this framework that takes the things we know in education from the research that are in place in highly effective, highly reliable schools and turns them into a framework. And that's reflected in 5 levels. The first starts with culture. At level 1, do we have a safe, supportive, collaborative culture in place? At level 2, we start talking about things like, do we have highly effective teaching in every one of our classrooms? We move to level 3, and that's, can we establish a guaranteed and viable curriculum? Have we identified what's important for all students to know and be able to do? And how do we keep track of those things? At level 4, we get into the idea of standards referenced reporting. So instead of reporting overall scores for kids, and this is where really levels 3, 4, and 5, this work with assessment really starts to tie in. It does at level 2 as well, but really gets into the weeds. At level 4, it's can we report on students' understanding of the most important things, those priority topics that we've established. And at level 5, we move into that realm of competency-based education. And that's where students move through the curriculum based on mastery, not based on their seat time. So students who can move quicker are allowed to, and those students who need a little more time to master some of those concepts have that extra time to do so.
Awesome. I appreciate you kind of laying out that framework for what kind of because I know in our work together it was a big deal trying to hit the levels and become a high reliability school. Nathan, I'm gonna turn it let you jump in. So I know you're anxious.
Now, yeah. Well, it's a good topic, believe it or not. And it's very, very important. So kudos to you for digging into that. Sometimes, we've talked about this before. You start getting to assessment and what we believe about assessment, and we start stepping on toes. So it's called assessment literacy for educators. When you use the term assessment literacy, what do you most want educators and leaders to understand?
Great question. So, just to give credit where credit's due, and I try to always do that. That term assessment literacy was really established by Rick Stiggins. If you go back and look at some of the early assessment pieces that he was talking about, he brings this idea of assessment literacy to the surface. And when what is assessment literacy and why it's important? A person who is assessment literate can distinguish between sound and unsound assessment practices. And they know which methods to use when and how to use them productively. So which tests do I use in the right moment? How do I use the results from these different types of assessment that we use in education to make decisions? So a person who's assessment literate knows how those tests can be used. They know which practices to engage with when. And so why is that important? Um, at different levels, it means something different. At a district level, when we think about assessment literacy, it's do we understand how large scale assessment works and what the data tells us and how those things are created. What is the role of interim assessment in our schools and how do we use the data from those to make decisions, all the way down to classroom assessments. How do we create those? How do we use those? What is the value of that data? Each one of those types of assessments creates a different type of data that's used for a different purpose. So at a district level and a building level, understanding how to use that data, how to use those results in a way that's sound, is crazy important. And that's true for our teachers at the classroom level. It's true for our policymakers at the state and federal level, parents, understanding what do each of those assessments and the results from them mean. Um, it's a big piece, but it's a manageable piece. And the longer I've done this, and I know I'm a little biased given the nature of the work, but as I think about the decisions we make all the time in schools, anyone who's involved in making those decisions, district office, counselors, building levels, teachers, our special services departments, all of those things, we make so many decisions about kids and where we place kids and how we support kids based on assessments. So I think it behooves us as professionals to have a deep understanding, as deep as we can garner, about what do those results mean? How do I interpret those results? How do I create assessments that I can trust in my classroom? So really, and anyone who ever makes decisions about kids based on assessments should be assessment literate.
Mm.
Okay, I'm a new superintendent coming in. Just I've been coming up through the ranks, and I'm listening to this, and I'm hearing you say, the district level assessment down to the interim assessment to the classroom assessment, and I'm thinking to myself, well, aren't those given to us? Isn't the map test given to us? Aren't So can you? How new superintendent coming in and thinking a lot of this is dictated to us? What's the first step kind of in that new superintendent, even understanding what assessment you have control over, what assessment you don't?
Great distinction there, Jim. I appreciate that. That difference between what we have control over and what we don't. And you're right. When it comes to the large scale state assessments and those interim assessments a little more, but it's still very limited. We don't have control over those. So as a new superintendent coming in, having an understanding of what is the purpose of large scale assessment? Why are those created? What are they used for? And in a really short explanation of that, large scale assessments like our state assessments or even things like AP exams and IB, those types of things, they are designed to sample. Let's just stay with state assessments. They're designed to sample across all of the state standards that they can. They can't ask about every one. There's not enough time. It would be too large a test. So they are going to sample across the state standards and they're looking at where are students relative to that sample of the state standards. It's not everything. It's just across the board. And the data we get from those assessments can be looked at in a valid way, in a reliable way, at the district level and at the building level. When we start breaking those assessments down, classroom it gets a little iffy, but when we go all the way down to the individual student, which I know is in a lot of places is a popular practice, the reliability and validity starts to fall apart in the assessment because that's not what they're designed to do. They're designed to look at how are the group, the population, or the sample of our students doing relative to the state standards. And that's important. That's important for long range planning. It's important for if we've just implemented a new curriculum resource, a new math program, or something like that that we've put in place we can use that large scale data over 3, 5, 7 years to see is it moving the needle in the way we want it to. That type of data, it's great for. It's what it's designed to do. If we want to really get into closer to how do we make more real-time decisions about where students are and how do we best support them, our next step is that interim. The interim assessments, things like iReady, NWEA, there's a ton of them out there. They are designed to live between large scale assessments, which we have no control over. It behooves us to have an idea what's on there, but they have their purpose. And the classroom assessments, which can focus in really quickly, really specifically into multiple standards in real time. They are great for that purpose. So the interims live in the middle. We don't have a ton of control over them, but we do get to take them more than once a year. We get results back quickly, and we can use those closer to the classroom level. We can use those to make some general decisions about students and some groupings and some things like that. Um, Nothing will beat, though, really high quality classroom assessments that our teachers use, that our teachers create when it comes to making real time decisions about kids and interventions and how do we best support them. So, as a new superintendent, understanding the role of those three types of assessment within the system. How do I use the data? What is the data good for? It's all valuable. It's just using it in the right way. So here's the challenge. I'm probably asking your follow-up question for you. Here's the question. Here's the challenge. So once I understand that, now I've got to go explain that to my district. I've got to explain it to my board. I've got to explain it to my community. I've got to explain it to my teach. All these audiences need to have that same understanding. And that shift from the idea that, I'm going to get on my soapbox now, that shift from the idea that the one and only true and trusted measure we should be looking at is the state assessment. It is a piece of data. It doesn't give us great information at the individual kid level. So I would encourage all superintendents and especially new superintendents that as we think about how do we communicate these things to our communities, our boards, our own staff and teachers in the building. Let's not look at just one piece of information to say this is how we're doing, especially at the student level. Let's look at all three of those pieces of information. Let's look at the large scale assessment. Let's make that part of what we share. Let's look at interim data if we have those in place and make that a part of what we share. And then what does it look like at the classroom level? When we get down to how are students doing on a day-by-day basis, which gets us right into the grading conversation. Are all those things connected? What we should see, if everything's functioning, I know too long an answer, if everything works together, those three pieces of data should triangulate. They should
Mm.
point us all in the same direction. And if they don't, then we know we've got something to go look at. Why don't they? If they don't match, what's going on? There's something amiss somewhere. That was a way long answer to your simple question. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Jim.
no, no, it's excellent information for, and not just new superintendents, veteran superintendents, a refresher about that. And yeah, and we could probably have a whole nother session on grading practices. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna let
just let
that
me know. I'm
lie.
ready.
I'm gonna let that lie for a minute.
Yeah, I'll push that over here.
Well, I'm glad you talked about all of that, but when you followed up with the how do you as leader communicate that to others and just the importance, and um, I think that's very important to the board, even to legislators, even to those outside the community, and understanding the role of assessment, understanding some of the current flaws within the system and how we improve that system. Which leads me to what are some of the biggest misconceptions schools still hold about assessment and grading?
I think, just staying with this theme of, and not to beat up on large scale assessments, I'm not anti large scale assessment. I just think we need to use them for their purpose. But it's back to this idea that the results from the large scale assessment are the most trusted thing we should lean into, that they are an accurate representation of the knowledge and skills of our students. And that those assessments, even the assessments that come with our resources, are better than anything we could create as classroom teachers. And that's just not the case. I think the reason that that misconception is there is all, I say all, the vast majority of the research around assessment that's been going on for the last few decades has focused in on large scale assessments. And from a research perspective, that kind of makes sense, right? We have the data now, thanks to No Child Left Behind. All of that has happened. So we have the data. Psychometricians and all the researchers in assessment have those things to work. It makes perfect sense. But what happened in that process is the classroom assessment research never really happened in a deep, deep way. So what happened is we took all these things we knew about large scale assessment and how we think about large scale assessment, the things with reliability and validity and all these things, and we just kind of applied them to classroom assessment. And if we do that, yeah, classroom assessment starts to look like it's got some reliability and validity issues. But that framework doesn't fit really well into classroom assessments. And I'll try not to chase that in the weeds. I'll plug the book, right? A lot of this stuff in depth and detail is in that new book. But because of that, we've kind of a lot of times moved away from trusting classroom assessments that we've created ourselves as teachers. We've thought of it as this unattainable, and it's not the case. Teachers are very capable with a little bit of training and some work and understanding to create high quality assessment opportunities in their classrooms that we should 100% trust and
Mhm.
use the data from. Um, I've just recently, in the last probably 3 or 4 months as I've been out, I've just started out of curiosity, and it's a limited sample size, but asking teachers, hey, when's the last time you guys got together and wrote assessment items? And they're telling me they haven't. And I think we can do a lot as leaders in this field to help create time and space for that and help teachers understand that, you know what, you have the expertise. We'll learn a little bit along the way, but you can do this. You can write great assessment items. I've got more if you guys got a minute. Um, this idea that assessments are a separate thing as we think about some of these misconceptions that, I'm in class and we do activities in class and we share things out and we have conversations and that's one thing. And then I've got some homework or some worksheets that we do and that's one thing, but it's just these quizzes, right? It's the quizzes and the unit assessments or whatever that we label those are. That's the only place assessment lives. And because of that, it's this kind of leads to that first misconception, right? But one of the things that we always encourage teachers to think about in terms of assessment at the classroom level is that anything that we as teachers do in our classroom that gives us information about what
Mhm.
students know and can do is a form of assessment. All those things I mentioned that we don't sometimes think. We had a conversation in class and I observed the student over their shoulder solving that math program problem. And we did some practice sheets and all of those things are forms of assessment if we take advantage of them. So we're doing assessment all the time. They are just as valid as anything that we could purchase or create on our own. Um, so those are the some of the big without getting into the grading piece. I've
Okay.
got some things there. But just from an assessment point of view, those are some of the misconceptions I see and hear a lot.
Well, I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed is when we talk about assessment, it seems like we immediately go to something we place in front of a kid and they answer, they have an answer and then we grade it. It was either right or wrong. And I can tell you, I've witnessed teachers that they could tell you at the end of the day which one of their 25 kids fully got it, which one of their kids partially got it, and which ones are completely lost. And they never put anything in their hand. But through their instruction and their just the way they teach, the way they have the kids respond, they're assessing every time they pause and ask a question. And I think for leaders that are looking to what does quality classroom instruction look like, I think that's one of the keys is that teacher assessing all day, not just when they put a worksheet in their hand or so yeah, great point there. Appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. And you're absolutely right. It's not that these things so often in classrooms aren't they're happening all the time. the piece that when we do eventually, maybe another time, get into some of the grading and how do we do some of those things, it's just capturing the data. You're right. Teachers will know. But then when it's that, well, I've got a parent teacher conference coming up. How do I just say, well, I just know? Yeah, document that stuff. Trust the documentation. Put a note in their portfolio or something like that that says, hey, watch this student successfully solve three quadrilateral equations on this date. Sign it. You've got some evidence. It's right there. You've got it. Trust those observations. Trust those little small assessment opportunities you have in your classroom.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback back on that as well. Assessments often come up in our work, like, hey, let's make sure we collaborate. Everyone gets that one down. And then let's talk about um, picking essential standards. And they'll do pretty well with that. And then let's really get deep into what those standards mean. Then we start hitting some tension. But one of the things that happens when we say the word assessment, and what I like what you're doing here in defining assessment is they automatically think I've got to have a unit test that I built with my peers and it's 75 questions and it takes an hour for me to give it. And
Hmm.
I might grade that in 3 weeks because it's so daunting instead of realizing just what Jim and you have said is develop one question. One question, like, hey, let, like the best assessment is the one that gives you the information you need for tomorrow, period. Right? It's not everything else. And so have your team create one question. Give that question. Go talk about the question. It doesn't have to be scheduled. It doesn't have to be, or, I mean, it doesn't have to be scheduled on a Tuesday after a huge review and all of those things. Make it smaller. Go back, collaborate with your peers, come back, reteach, regroup if you need to, or move on. And and what happens because we feel like we've got to give this traditional test to send back to parents and show in the grade book and the principal is, well, I'm just going to use what the textbook company gave me.
Hmm. And there's a go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if we break it down to some practical discussions for anybody that's had a kid, when you're raising that kid, you don't give them a bank of 20 things and say, hey, I'm going to teach you all these today. You, you find the things that they maybe are not getting as quickly to where you want them to be, whether it be manners or whatever it is, and you incrementally increase that, but you're constantly evaluating where they are in their manners. And if it's not the level you want them to be, then there's some correction and there's some moving forward. But it's not, and I think sometimes our teachers get so overwhelmed with the bulk of things that we expect them to teach that they forget everything is an incremental process. And it's just parenting, if they would just reflect back to how you parent, maybe. I guess I shouldn't throw all parents in there, but
Well, Jim, how about this? I've done youth coaching, I've done that, but you were a college athlete. And you've coached high school sports or you've coached at different levels, right? And sometimes it would be best if really these two worlds emerged in best practices in both, right? And so when you think about some of the best coaches that you've had, or the best coaching you've done, how it's no different. It's just different words, right? And so when you think about those scenarios and you're making coaching plans, maybe it, I throw this question at you, Jim, as you think about that. How would that? And you're talking about assessment. What illustration would you give for others to understand that?
yeah, I mean that's a great question because if we're struggling with hitting an outside pitch as a team, um, and our next assessment is 2 days from now when we go up against a pitcher that throws on the outside, we're going to have to work on that skill. And it doesn't work. We may have to forego a little bit of fielding. We may have to forego a little bit of base running. We got to get that skill. And so when you talk about priority standards, all of those things, but the assessment piece to that end is if we go through practice and I've thrown BP in the cage, we're going to walk away. I can tell you which one of the nine hitters are going to have the best day hitting an outside pitch. And I think that's what we're talking about with teachers. We're going to know which ones are going to be able to add two-digit numbers successfully and which ones are not.
Hmm. And then you can get into small groups and RTI and NTSS and like, oh, well, hold on a second. I've been doing that. And so again, if you're a principal or leader, maybe your background is like, I do not know what assessment literacy is and what these guys are talking about. Well, you probably know more than you think. It's just some different words if you've reflected on that. So,
Yeah, and you guys are spot on, and I love that connection with the coaching piece and the way assessment looks, and it's spot on, right? And Jim, you mentioned, we've got our priority standards, our supporting standards. We know where our team is, we know where our kids are through observation, through drill and practice, through purposeful assignments, and the things that we do. And it's the same in the classroom. We know what we want kids to know and be able to do. We observe them doing those things. We build purposeful opportunities for them to practice so that they can grow and get better and demonstrate how close they are to proficiency. We've been using the word assessment a lot, and because that's what this is about, right? Assessment literacy. And at its heart, what we're talking about is measurement. It's in all the
mhm.
different ways we can measure, whether it's knowledge or skill, all of those become, like we said with classrooms, all of those become forms of assessment. Where are students in their understanding? Where are they in their skill level? How will I then proceed? And Nathan, you've mentioned this a couple of times too. What am I going to do on Thursday to best meet the needs of my kids? Is everybody in the same place? Does this group need a little extra? Is this group ready to accelerate? Again, we're back to that idea of all the decisions we make from an instructional point of view, from a coaching point of view, from an intervention point of view, in one way or another are going to come back to sound assessment practices.
Yeah,
Agreed.
to carry the coaching analogy, we probably won't get to competency-based learning today and some of those topics, but we're talking about now assessing students of, a level rather than an 80% or a 70%, giving them gets it, doesn't get it, etc. Well, in athletics, don't we do the same thing? What's your free throw percentage? What's your on base percentage? What's your strike to ball ratio? I mean, we measure those things and we use that to make corrections. And that's, I think, to your point of
Mhm.
assessment is really measurement. And I would ask you just to go just a little bit deeper because you mentioned formative and summative evidence. Just share a little bit about how educators can better think about that as they support learning, not just reporting data.
Oh, I love that distinction. It's so important to me. If I don't come back to reporting versus grading or learning, because all these things are so interdependent. But great question with the formative and summative. So there's some interesting issues between those two things. And in our work through Bob, through Dr. Marzano, and the way we think about assessment, we are very deliberate in how we use those two phrases, formative and summative. So when we think about those in a traditional way, with formative, and this is not entirely accurate. It's some interesting things in the research, but we think about formative as sometimes as practice along the way to get ready for the summative, right? That's a very traditional way I hear teachers talk about the idea of formative. It's practice, it's not as valuable, it just stops along the way, all in preparation for the summative, right? The final be all. This is going to make the decision about whether or not you've got it or not, right? And that's an assessment. And all of these formative things along the way are we think about as assessment in that traditional framework. But the way we think about that, and the thing I always try to encourage teachers to change, it's a paradigm shift, is let's not think about formative and summative assessment. Let's think about formative and summative scores. Because at the end of the day, there is nothing magic about the summative assessment that doesn't live in the formative assessment that makes it summative, that makes it different. It might be a little more comprehensive if that's what we're doing with that end of unit test or whatever we're calling it, right? But the difference is in how do we use the data? And with formative assessment, we're building a body of evidence in a traditional system. We're putting these things together. Um, and we might make some changes. Hopefully, we make changes in instruction along the way based on the information we see there. But we're going to adjust. We're going to do things differently based on that formative data. At the summative in a traditional system, it's the final judgment. It's the end. We're not going to make, these are the definitions, right? We're not going to make changes. This is your final opportunity. But really, summative, if we think about the core of that word, summary, my summative assessment, if I choose to give like an end of unit comprehensive thing, should tell me what I already know. It should be another piece of data that verifies, to your point, Jim and Nathan both, that as teachers, we have a pretty good idea based on our experience where our kids are.
Mm.
The summative should tell us that. We should not be surprised by results on a summative, the end of unit assessment, right? So when we think about this from our perspective of thinking about formative and summative scores versus assessments, all of these things we're doing along the way, regardless of what we call them, are pieces of evidence of student levels of understanding relative to back to what we want students to know and be able to do, those priority and supporting standards. So in the way we work through that, the formative scores come from those assessments, whatever they are. The observation, the traditional quiz, the homework, the whatever it is. Those are formative scores.
Formative scores.
We're gathering those along the way. The summative score then is generated not by a standalone assessment, but by that body of evidence. It is a score. So we look at that body of evidence and we will not chase too deep into grading and scoring and how to do that in different ways that maintain the validity and reliability of that system. But the summative score is that it's a summary of the data I have gathered through the formative to establish that score. And that distinction is important because back to the idea of assessment literacy, what does that score mean and represent? The formative scores are individual. It's how did I do on this worksheet and this quiz? And did the teacher observe me doing it this way? And was I able to explain it in class this way? Individual pieces along the way. The summative is where I look at that data and I look at the scores that I have, and either mathematically or through mounting evidence, I make a decision about where is the student's level of understanding based on all these formative scores that I have. And that shift can in one at one time be kind of like, so wait, I it creates both freedom and fear, right? So I don't have to have this giant summative be all end all make my decisions based on one test score thing. Yeah, please don't. Please don't use one test to make a decision. We can get into
Mm.
the weeds of
Yeah.
that at some point, but use that body of evidence. If you want to give kind of a comprehensive at the end as a final check to make sure that we talked about triangulating data earlier on, sure, do that. Not a thing in the world wrong with it. Use it as a comment so that we between teachers can compare data and make sense and do that in a valid. That's great, but stick it in as another piece of data. Don't
I
don't
think
weight
it,
it so
it's
heavily that it just pulls or drops kids based on performance on one assessment.
Yeah, the thing that comes to my mind immediately when you're talking through that is Renee taught in a class, elementary classroom for 30 years and gave the end of year test, all of that. I don't ever remember her coming and saying, "Hey, my kids killed it," or "My kids didn't do great." But I do remember occasions where she would say, I don't know what happened with Johnny or Sally
Hmm.
because all year they were killing it and their score was different. Or and that's where you're getting at with the formative. She knew that Johnny or Sally got it, but something happened on that end of the year exam that they didn't perform it. And so as we think about systems, are we do we want to put our eggs in the basket of that teacher that saw them all year, or do we want to count on that one test that who knows what could have gone on in their morning that morning? So
Exactly. There are so many things that impact how students do on those assessments. And it can take us all the way back to large scale assessments, right? Back to the state test
yeah.
that have nothing to do with their knowledge level or the test itself. That will completely throw off the results of that assessment. And being knowledgeable of that, cognizant of that, is crazy important. And if that happens, if you're a teacher and that happens in your classroom and you're going along, you've got all this data and you're like, well, I always pick on Nathan. Nathan's right here. I know how he's going to score, right? And then Nathan takes the test and it does not come out that way. One of the tenets in the book is okay, so I've got this strange piece of data that doesn't make any sense. I don't trust it. What do I do with it? Well, traditionally, we just put it in the grade book and we averaged it and we hope for the best, right? Well, how
Yeah.
about a different approach? How about we look at that and we get, I don't know what happened. That doesn't match. I don't trust that piece of data. So what do I do now? Let's do this. Let's take the test. Let's take that assessment. Let's go sit down with Nathan and go, hey, this didn't go, you didn't do as well as I thought you were probably going to do. Let's talk through this. Tell me what happened. And maybe do some error analysis. Can you tell me where you went wrong? And have this conversation. And then we finish that conversation. And if I'm confident in that framework that Nathan has been able to explain to me the things that he got wrong, not with me telling him, just talk to me, have a conversation, ask some probing questions, then I can right then, this is where we start to get uncomfortable sometimes. I can change the score on that assessment because now I've got a piece of evidence that I trust more, that is more valid and reliable. Then I can go change that in the gradebook and we can move on. And I didn't have to write a reassessment. I didn't have to write another test. This
Lead.
student or these three students didn't perform the way all of my other evidence showed me they were going to. So let's go ask. Let's spend 3 minutes with each kid, maybe five. Let's figure out when to do that and have that conversation so that then we make really good decisions based on that data.
That's good. I love the permission you give them. Hey, so last question. And you've been in different roles. We always like to ask our guests about wellness. It's very important to us. Um, but it can also, this work is demanding, but it matters. And so, how do you take care of yourself, or what worked for you, or what have you seen, and remain grounded so you can continue leading and serving others well?
I'm probably not the best person at this. I I'm more in balance now with my life than I've ever probably been
Mm,
when I was a practitioner before I retired, but it is still probably out of balance more than it should be with the amount of time. But that's part of the gig in some degree. But I agree, the ability to stay healthy, to take care of yourself. I mean, from a physical point of view, for me, I try to make sure that I eat as well as I can, make it to the gym, um, do those things that keep my body healthy and moving. Um, drink the water. Thank you, Tina. I've loved Tina Bugren's work as well. So, drink the water, do the yoga, all those things. But they're important. They do make a difference. So keeping myself physically active and moving from that perspective so that I can show up in your school and I can have a good energy level and navigate the airports and all those types of things and continue to learn and grow and write and coach and things. From a kind of that mental side, that educational side, is trying to make sure that as much as I love this work and I'm passionate about the work I get to do with teachers around all of the things that I get to work with, having some other interests outside of that so that I don't get just into
mm,
that rut, right? So I
yeah.
try to stay active. I love to do things with my hands, whether it's woodworking, stained glass, those types of things, so that I have another outlet that's creative that can occupy my time so that I can step away from that work, set it to the side. I love it. I'm crazy and passionate about it, but set that to the side. Let my brain focus and do other things that are beneficial and creative where I'm still continuing to learn. And then I'm able to come back to that with fresh eyes and put that back into a perspective and do those types of things. And then, on a more philosophical or spiritual side, just making sure I stay connected as much as I can with folks like you who have been a part of my career. Gosh, Jim, when we were teaching together, how long ago?
A long time
It's
ago. Yeah,
let's not sell ourselves out here, right? It's
you're gonna
been a
start
minute.
talking about age now. Yeah.
Yeah, you
You were
were
talking about some of those things when mom was principal. I'm like, oh wow, you. So I remember, weren't you counselor when she was principal, and you
teacher
had,
and counselor. And
oh,
just as
oh,
a shout out to Shirley, one of the best principals I served under, truly.
oh,
I learned
I'll
a
share that
lot
with
from
her. You're
her.
very
So
kind.
make sure you tell her. Um, but yeah, I mean, you were teaching business. I was teaching English. I became a counselor and all the things. Nathan, we met in graduate school. I can't tell you how many years ago. But keeping those things connected, keeping those relationships there, spending time with family, taking care of those things, making sure my purpose stays front and foremost. Um, Making sure that I continue to make decisions like I've always tried to. And we all slip and fail along the way at times, right? But the work that I do, remembering that at the end of the day, whether I'm doing something like this with you, or I'm writing, or I'm in schools, that at the end of the day, all of this stuff we're working on, that we're trying to learn more about and grow and implement and shift systems and make the best decisions we can at the end of the day, all of that is going to lead directly, not in a random kind of way, but directly back to the students that sit in our chairs every day.
Mm,
That
good.
we have a duty, okay, school philosophy by Mike, right? School by Mike, that we have a duty to do the best job we can and learn as much as we can about our craft and our process as teachers, as leaders, and all the roles that we fill to ensure that we can create the best outcomes for those kids because they deserve it. They're counting on us to make those things happen. Now I am preaching. Um,
Yeah. Oh man, great stuff. And I kind of our days with the three of us and Richie. Oh man, I count my blessings all the time that I get to work with you three, and just your passion for what you do. And so we appreciate you taking time today, sharing your journey, perspective with us. Just I'm hopeful that we'll get you back on here and talk about grading practices, because I know that's a deep topic, and but one that we were all kind of on the same page with. So we'll try to get you back on that. So we
I, I
appreciate
would I would
it.
love that. It's one of the things that I've just, I don't know if struggled with is the right thing, but the first time, and it was probably Dr. Heffelbauer, the first time someone started talking about these ideas, it just clicked for me. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Why do we do the things we do to kids? I'm like setting this up, right?
Uh-huh.
In terms of grading practices, reporting practices, and those kinds of things. Um, yeah, it's just been a passion project of mine for years, and a thing that I've learned, working with Tammy or working with Dr. Marzano and Miss Sims, Julia, and those folks. I've just learned so much along the way in the schools that I've been blessed to serve. So
That's awesome. I appreciate you continuing to serve, and best wishes with supporting your book and going out and teaching the contents of it. To our listeners, we hope today's conversation encourages you to think deeply about the role assessment plays in your own school or district, and reminds you that meaningful leadership includes the courage to rethink long-standing practices in service of students. If your district's interested in sustained leadership coaching, systems work, or professional development, Nathan and I would be glad to visit with you about how Lifted can partner in that work. So until next time, be well and keep leading with purpose beyond the bell.